There are some stories that begin not with words, but with silence, and for Margaret, silence was where her story had always lived. Every morning, she would sit by the window of her small cottage, overlooking the garden her husband once tended. The roses had long since grown wild, twisting through the old white fence like memories that refused to fade. Around her neck, she wore a simple silver necklace, tarnished in places, but always shining when the light hit it just right. To anyone else, it was just a pendant, but to her, it was everything she never got to say, and everything she wished she hadn't kept inside. Gentle pause. If you're listening, take a moment to breathe. These stories, they remind us how fragile love can be and how strong forgiveness must become. If you enjoy calm, heartfelt stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Pause Soft Tone returns. Margaret had been married to Daniel for 43 years. He wasn't a bad man, just one who never quite learned how to speak the language of love. His silence filled the house, heavier than words could ever be. He was the kind of man who fixed broken things but never mended broken hearts. They had met when they were young, he, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and shy eyes. She, a school teacher with dreams larger than their small town could hold. But love in those days didn't need much, just shared laughter, morning coffee, and a belief that forever was a promise they could keep. Over time, though, the laughter thinned. Their words turned practical. Conversations became exchanges about bills, about errands, about the weather. Margaret used to wear dresses just to see if he'd notice. Sometimes he did, more often he didn't, and so she learned to stop asking for attention. She learned to find comfort in small things: the kettle's whistle, the smell of lavender soap, the way the necklace Daniel had given her on their 10th anniversary rested against her collarbone. He'd bought it one morning after forgetting their anniversary completely. Margaret hadn't said a word, but her eyes told the story. Daniel, awkward and ashamed, had rushed into town, returning with the silver pendant and a few wildflowers. He never said sorry, not once. But that night, as he fastened the necklace around her neck, his hands trembled. And Margaret understood that was his apology. So she wore it every day, not because it was beautiful, but because it was his way of saying what his heart could not. Years passed, and they grew older. Their home filled with photographs and unspoken emotions, moments they lived through but never truly shared. When Daniel became ill, Margaret cared for him tenderly, brushing his hair, reading to him from the same old book he once fell asleep to. He never said much, even then, but she didn't need him to. Until one evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, he reached for her hand and whispered, "The box in the shed." And then, nothing more. When he was gone, the silence felt different. It wasn't cold or empty, it was waiting. A week later, Margaret found the box. It was old, covered in dust, tucked beneath his workbench. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each one addressed to her. The first one began, "I've never been good with words, but I need you to know. I always saw you." Margaret's hands shook as she unfolded each page, each sentence written in the kind of handwriting that only love can make clumsy. He'd written about the first time he saw her laugh, about how he'd kept the dried flower from their first date, about every time he wanted to say sorry but didn't know how. And at the bottom of the final letter, taped carefully, was a tiny silver charm identical to the pendant she'd worn all these years. A matching half. She realized then, the necklace was never complete. He had kept the other half all along. Margaret pressed the charm to her chest, and for the first time in years, she spoke aloud, softly, trembling. "I forgive you, Daniel. I always did." That night, she placed both halves together on her nightstand, and for the first time, the silence in that room didn't feel like distance. It felt like peace, soft, close, emotional reflection. Sometimes love isn't loud. It doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it whispers through small acts, a necklace, a letter, a trembling hand trying to say, "I'm sorry." And sometimes we spend a lifetime learning that love was always there. It just spoke in a language we had to grow old to understand. The morning after reading the letters, Margaret woke early. The sun hadn't yet reached over the hills, and the garden outside still carried the hush of dawn. She dressed carefully in the soft blue dress Daniel once said brought out her eyes, and fastened the necklace around her neck, but this time both halves hung together, complete. The silver pendant caught the light as she stepped outside, the air cool against her skin. In her hands, she held the letters, tied gently with a faded ribbon. She knew where she needed to go. The old park by the river hadn't changed much since they were young. The same willow tree leaned toward the water as if listening to its own reflection. That was where Daniel had first asked her to dance awkwardly, shyly, under a sky freckled with stars. She'd laughed and taken his hand, and he'd stepped on her feet twice before whispering, "I'm sorry." It was the first and last time she'd ever heard him say those words aloud. Margaret sat on the bench near the willow and unfolded one of the letters. The paper trembled in her hands, but her heart felt still. She read the last one again, the ink slightly smudged from years of being touched. "If you ever read this, know that I loved you in every way I knew how. I wish I'd been braver with my words. You deserved more than my silence." Shi Chao smiled softly, eyes glistening. "You tried, Daniel. That was enough." From her bag, she pulled out a small wooden box. Inside it, she placed the letters and the necklace, the complete pendant, glinting faintly, as if catching its final breath of sunlight. She buried it beneath the willow roots, pressing the earth gently, like tucking a secret to sleep. As she rose, a breeze drifted through the branches, carrying the scent of roses and oil, a mix of her garden and his workshop. She could almost hear him then, laughing softly, saying her name the way he used to when no one else was listening. Margaret looked up at the sky, her voice steady, her heart unburdened. "Goodbye, my love. You can rest now. We both can." She turned to leave, her steps slow but sure. And as the morning light touched the water, something shimmered there, a reflection of silver, brief and bright, before it disappeared beneath the ripples. It wasn't sadness she felt. It was release. For some goodbyes aren't endings, they're the peace that follows, after every word has finally been said. Gentle, closing narration. Sometimes the truest apologies come too late to be heard, but not too late to be felt. And sometimes what we hold on to the longest isn't regret, but love waiting for its chance to be forgiven. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who still believes in second chances. And remember, forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past, but it softens its edges.